British communists singing the anthem of an international communist movement most accept no longer exists. With communism in retreat in Eastern Europe, what role is there for a very small communist party in the West? One prominent British communist has called on party members to tear down the Berlin Wall in their own minds and consider all the options, changing the party's name, merging, even perhaps relinquishing its status as a political party. Many may well be asking, is this the last time we'll be hearing the Internationale? 1989's been a bad year for the communist old guard in Eastern Europe. It was also the year that Gordon MacLennan bowed out, of his own accord, as leader of the Communist Party of Great Britain.
The reform process in Eastern Europe I welcome unreservedly. I think it will be of great benefit to socialism and to humanity. The Berlin Wall being breached is the latest and most potent symbol of the end of the Cold War. I am happy with that.
The British Party has long been a critic of communist totalitarianism. It denounced the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia at the time, but its boldness has brought it little new blood. Indeed, the party has been in almost uninterrupted decline for 40 years. This Congress was the first Ian Aitken, political editor of The Guardian, had reported on since the 50s.
It was a very different gathering from the one back in 1957, when the really strong section of the Communist Party was the industrial section. There were very, very large numbers of trade unionists, many of whom were shop stewards and that sort of thing, and leading lights in their unions. And it was these people who really gave what was even then a fairly small political party the kind of clout that it possessed, the kind of clout that made it the object of a great deal of effort on the behalf of MI5 and the special branch and that sort of thing. But this year, there were lots of young people who were associated with the kind of causes that at one time were very prominent in the loony left in the Labour Party, such as lesbians and gays. But the old folk, the original communists, were all up in the gallery. They had visitors' tickets. There was one particular one who had been the Moscow correspondent of the Daily Worker, as it then was, and also foreign correspondent and foreign editor of the Daily Worker for years and years. He looked very sad as he gazed down on this scene.
But some of the old-timers are still in there and fighting. Rose Kerrigan joined the Communist Party way back in 1921, when the beacon was Lenin, the Bolsheviks and the Russian Revolution.
I visited the Soviet Union 4 times. And so I know I lived there for 9 months, way back in 1935. I had seen great changes there. It's wrong to think that everything's been bad, because it isn't so.
But if it was Soviet Russia which gave inspiration to communists in the West, it was Soviet Russia too which sullied that idealism.
I was very horrified and very, very upset, and so was my husband, at the revelations about Stalin. But I never ever felt that it was any reason for giving up the ideal of communism and any reason for giving up a party that was fighting for betterment of the working class in this country, because that's what we were always doing.
Coming to terms with Stalinism has been a painful process. The movement has splintered. Besides the Communist Party of Great Britain, the CPGB, there's also the CPB Marxist-Leninist, the NCP, the RCP, the RCG, with little more than 10,000 members between them. The most serious fracture between modernisers and traditionalists came last year. Hardliners in the CPGB, along with some who'd been expelled, sought, in their own terms, to re-establish British communism. The General Secretary of the Communist Party of Britain, the CPB, is Mike Hicks.
The Communist Party of Great Britain has taken on, clearly now, a position that is non-Marxist, and also indicating they're going to become, in their structure, not a Leninist structure. And also they're talking about changing their name as a final thing. But the difference is that we see the class struggle in Britain very clearly. They see it in a mixed up way. That came over very clear on their programme. Our programme is clear. It's a concise programme that's for political change in this country through political struggle, both parliamentary and extra-parliamentary, ending up in a government of a Labour government, of a new type of Labour government, that will take into account the feelings of the masses of the people. With that, we hope that the Communist Party will be playing its part in it.
Although much the smaller party, the CPB has the upper hand in the communist daily paper that used to be called the Daily Worker.
Morning Star. It's your Morning Star.
Morning Star.
Morning Star.
A Saturday morning in Hackney in East London, and Chris Jennings is at his regular sales pitch. How many does he sell?
It's very variable. We come up here with about 10 to a dozen papers, and we can have a bleak morning, which maybe sell only a couple or three, and then sometimes we can sell 8, or on a very good occasion we sometimes almost sell out.
It's strange, isn't it, because the East End once used to be a communist stronghold. I mean, not far from here there was once a communist member of Parliament, and here you are selling what's supposed to be the workers' paper, and it sells perhaps 10 or a dozen copies if you're lucky.
Yes. What has happened in the East End, and I suppose amongst working people's awareness, and the sort of that a lot of people have become quite anaesthetised to what is happening politically. But nevertheless, it's encouraging sometimes, the reactions we get, and particularly when certain other major issues are on, like the miners' strike or the ambulance strike. We get a lot of encouragement from people who just come by, you know, suddenly when things do surface, big issues like that.
The Morning Star, the paper for peace and socialism. It now apparently sells about as many copies in the Soviet bloc as it does in Britain. Mary Browning also lives in Hackney, but she's a member of the CPGB, and they've no time for the traditionalist approach of the Morning Star. So what does her brand of communist do?
We're involved in campaigns against the through roads, which are threatening to divide our borough in 4. We're involved in campaigns with the anti-apartheid movement. We've been involved in solidarity work with the Turkish and Kurdish refugees in our borough. A whole variety of issues right across the range. You'll find communists deeply involved in them.
Nothing very revolutionary in that. Indeed, nothing to embarrass a church group or community association. Who then are today's communists?
I don't know, I think they're ordinary people really. We've got quite a mixture in our branch. It goes from, we've got one member who's celebrating 50 years in the Communist Party at the beginning of next year. Quite a few sort of people in their 20s like myself, a few people in between. We do a variety of different jobs. We've got lots of single parents in our branch. The number is rising steadily to, I think we've got about 4 or 5 now.
The Communist Party may have shed its old culture of the shop stewards party, the preserve of skilled manual workers, but it's not gained any cohesive new identity. Ian Aitken's parents were foundation members of the Communist Party, but sentiment plays no part in his political perspective.
They're a ludicrous organisation. They've fallen from, I think, probably somewhere around 70,000 at the height of their popularity, which was largely on the strength of the successes of the Red Army during the war, to a mere 7,500. Not only that, they've jettisoned pretty well all of the things that they stood for, including the central issue of the class war and that sort of thing. If those things don't exist, it's almost impossible to see what conceivable point there is in keeping this party going.
The one unquestioned success of the CPGB has been the magazine Marxism Today, which its editor, Martin Jakes, argues with some justice has had an impact extending far beyond the narrow confines of the communist movement.
It is not true to say that the Communist Party hasn't enjoyed quite a lot of influence during the course of the 80s. And here there's been a paradox between its own decline and the kind of impression, the kind of impact it's had on a quite significant section of the thinking left, helping to shift them really from ideas of a rather fundamentalist disposition to being much more modernistic. And in that sense, I think the Communist Party has actually played quite an important role, directly and indirectly, in the cultural and ideological modernisation of the Labour Party.
It says something when a party's relevance is measured by its influence on a rival party. Martin Jakes has suggested that the Communist Party should eventually explore the possibility of affiliating to the Labour Party. After all, Labour harbours many much further to the left. But most observers believe it would be electoral madness for Labour to welcome communists en masse. 7,000 extra members would be little compensation for 700,000 lost votes. So the salvation of the CPGB lies in its own hands, and particularly those of Nina Temple, likely to be its next General Secretary.
The decline has been going on for a long time, and I think it's certain that if we carry on in the same old way, we will disappear as any meaningful force in politics. in the next few years. I think there'll always be some people who will remain out of nostalgia. So I think to become a force in the new politics that we want to see in Britain, which would be a pluralistic politics, that the Communist Party has to be very open-minded about its future. I think we need to have a vision of the kind of world that we want to see, and both argue for it in terms of ideas, but also work for it in practice, try and get the kind of campaigns that we want to see really living, and be open-minded about what party political form that will mean for us. I mean, it might be a renewal of the Communist Party, it might be the end of the Communist Party as we know it, but with the traditions that we've stood for, finding new form in some new alliance of forces.
This is the language of the Italian communists, long-time allies of the CPGB. They're intending to drop the name communist, abandon Leninism and embrace social democracy. But in Italy there are almost 200 communist deputies. There's not been a communist in the House of Commons for almost 40 years. And in the whole of England there's just one communist councillor, John Peck in Nottingham.
I'd like to see, as a matter of fact, a communist party of the future that's a kind of marriage of red and green. I was in Friends of the Earth decades ago, and have been associated with green politics, opposition to new power, nuclear power, etc. during that period. And the kind of party that I'm fighting for is perhaps a somewhat different kind of party, a marriage both of the ideas and of the kind of structures. We've something to learn from the Greens in a structure sense, and we've certainly something to learn in an electoral sense. The Communist Party has. Red and green, that's the way forward.
But it may not be so easy to co-opt well-established protest movements to the communist cause. Modernisers such as Martin Jakes, so many of whom learnt their communism not from class struggle but from their parents, are not at all certain there is a way forward for the party.
I think it's going to be an extremely difficult enterprise, and it also one that requires tremendous courage and a lot of creativity. And even if all those are applied, absolutely no guarantee of success. In fact, probably well under 50% chance of getting anywhere.
So what you're actually saying is that the chances are that the Communist Party will not survive in any meaningful sense?
To be absolutely honest about it, that has to be the most likely outcome of the situation, but it is not inevitable.
But what of Rose Kerrigan and her generation, who've invested their lives in the communist cause?
I don't believe that we'll lose out completely. I know it's sad, I'm really very upset. But the party I helped to form, and that's why I stand by it, because I think that we still need the Communist Party in Britain today.
Comrades, we've had a great Congress. We have great traditions. We have a great future. Thank you all.